So I wanted to talk a little bit about Asian people and how they're viewed in Scotland compared to America. So first of all, are they viewed any differently in Scotland compared to America? Um, the short answer, and the short answer is this, and I'll give you the long answer, but the short answer is no. Um, you would find that Asian people are pretty much viewed in the same way. They're assimilated, in the same way. People like talking to Asian people. They still are considered kind of quiet, maybe less attractive, studious kinds of people. And they're still heavily concentrated in math and science related fields. And they're still kind of the type that are just quieter. Um, the stereotype about Asian people being quiet and studious and those kinds of things, as I've said before, it's a stereotype, but it's rooted somewhat in the own cultural presuppositions that Asian people kind of put themselves in terms of group dynamics. And it doesn't matter what country you're from. It doesn't matter whether you're in America or in a similarly Western, largely white, developed country. Asian people are playing the same role in Scotland as they do in America. Here's my example. I'm a math major, and in my math major, I have this joke, or I have this joke that I run around with people. But really, they divide the lectures because our lecture is so big in pure mathematics into two groups, and one is A through L, and then the other is M through Z. And M through Z has like twice as many people as A through L. It's so funny. It's because of all the Asians. And all the Asians, you have a lot more of those Wongs and Wangs and Shu's and Yangs, more than the Changs and the Lees and the things like that. Um, so I mean, you do that kind of study and you see Asian people are highly concentrated in math science related fields, and you know what? Well, that means we're going to make a ton more money. That's awesome. That's great. But it does mean that we play largely the same role in society, in Scottish society, as we do in American society. We're the intellectual brainchilds that kind of fuel the fire, fuel the tech sector, probably don't get recognized enough, are the engineers behind all of the software developments, or the accountants behind the big guys. But largely, we still don't rise up to the elite leader level positions. The politicians, the CEOs, those kinds of people. And it doesn't matter whether you're in America or in Scotland, which comes to show. By the way, Scotland is a very progressive country, extremely progressive. People here are very, they like to think of themselves as, woke and racially woke. Though race isn't as much of a problem here, or much of an issue here, as it is in America. Really, more of the problem here surrounds class, but that's a different story. Right now, about race, right? You have people consider themselves to be woke kinds of people, and yet Asian people are still placed in the same separate role. So this isn't a result of like, oh, conservative stereotypes, boxing Asian people in and just like completely destroying Asian sensibilities from the outside. This is really a result of our own cultural sensibilities. You go back to Confucius, even you say our desire for obedience to authority. Then you go to the time of the Communist Party, and the emphasis on loyalty above all else is huge right now. Is huge. um, and those kinds of cultural values have seeped into our culture, Asian people's culture, and those things are undeniable, whether you're from the United States or whether you're from Scotland. Um, there is one difference that I want to talk about just before I get going, but right now the big difference that I see in the way that Asian people are treated is in the language barrier. Okay, so in the United States, Asian Americans make up about 7% of the population, which you might think, oh, that's nothing. But because they're so heavily concentrated in certain areas, in some spots you're going to find a huge amount of Asian American people, especially in upper middle class suburban areas. And those Asian people are highly assimilated. And the reason why they're highly assimilated is because they're fluent. They're fluent in English, okay, extremely fluent. You get a lot of second generation Asian American people who are extremely fluent in English and thus more likely to assimilate into the culture. Over in Scotland, you have a lot more Asian international people than you have, Asian Scottish people. I know like one Asian Scottish person I know two Asian Scottish people like born and raised in Scotland, and they're fascinating people. Have you ever seen like an Asian person pull up a fluent Scottish accent? It's like so it like blows your mind. Um, Evidently, that guy went over to America and he started talking to some of the chicks over in America, and they thought he was so cool because he was like an Asian Scottish person. Oh wow, pull that off. But anyway, I mean, what you see here is like you have a lot more Asian international people, and so you have more of that language barrier. And because you have more of that language barrier, you have more of that perception of kind of lack of assimilation or unassimilation to society. You see more of the grouping of Asian people together into their own kind of separate groups. And that's something that you generally see over here. You see actually more racial segregation between Asian people and white people than you do in the United States. In the United States, you see white and Asian people get along really well and get along just fine. Sure, Asian people go to one side, white people go to the other side in some parts, but you really see more of that cultural assimilation. I really do think it's because of the language. But you don't see that as much over in Scotland here. And so really the key is, if you want an assimilated immigrant society that can bring diverse populations that are contributors not just economically but also culturally as members of your elite, the political elite, the first thing you have to do is learn the language and be fluent at the language. And that's the next step for Asian people in Scotland. And that's a step that I think Asian Americans as a whole in general have largely transcended. So this is kind of what we're facing right over here in terms of what Asians are perceived in Scotland versus in America. Next time, I'm going to talk a little bit more about race in Scotland, and then I'm going to talk about some more reflections more in general about this country. But thanks for joining me.